All right, guys, we have covered hyperthermia, hypothermia, lightning, um, and now we need to and altitude, really need to finish up everything else. So today we are going to get going with air pollution. Okay, so this is a problem in the United States. However, we do see this as an even bigger problem in some other countries around the world. There's some Asian countries that have been known for issues with this before. This other way. So we break air pollution up into two different types. Photochemical haze, which we define as the nitrogen dioxide in the stagnant air, how that's acted on by sunlight to produce ozone. Okay, so this one a little bit more intense. Smog is the combination of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate. Okay, so two different types, but let's go into what those are. Now, ozone. This is formed by the action of how the sun, of the action of sunlight on carbon-based chemicals. Okay, so during minimum activity levels, ozone is usually not impacted. Higher intensity will have a negative effect on your work output. So think about having problems like trouble breathing, coughing, chest tightness, taking really big, deep breaths is going to be painful, nausea, eye irritation, especially for people that wear contacts because contacts tend to dry the eyes already. And overall fatigue, which typically is going to come from the shortness of breath, all the way down into like true lung irritation and more of a chance to get infections in your lungs in general. Obviously, people that are asthmatic, higher risk. People with COPD, people with long-term lung problems, anything like that, going to be at a greater risk. However, born there, lived there, deal with it all the time, you could become desensitized. It could become less of a problem for you. Now, nitrogen dioxide, that is the thing that comes out of like the back of your car, automobiles, power plants, gas stoves. It is a factor in ozone and acid rain. Okay, irritates the lung, lower resistance to any kind of respiratory infection at all. It can also more greatly affect children. Sulfur dioxide is a colorless gas that has to do with burning coal or petroleum, and it causes increased resistance to air movement in and out of the lungs. So you can still move, you can still take the breaths, but the air doesn't move as well. So the lungs are not functioning as good. They can't get rid of foreign matter, which then leads to shortness of breath, coughing, fatigue, all of those same things that we've already talked about. This sulfur dioxide is hugely affected on asthmatics. Now, we have found that breathing through your nose lessens the effects because we have all those little hairs in your nasal mucosa. The snot itself that's in there actually helps to filter out some of that stuff. So, nose breathing is good, but think about when you're working out. Are we usually nose breathing when we're working out? No, it's usually an open mouth, sucking air kind of breathing. Carbon monoxide, colorless, odorless gas. This is the one that you hear about people dying from, and they never knew it, kind of in their sleep, kind of a thing. Carbon monoxide reduces hemoglobin's ability to transport oxygen. It also restricts oxygen getting to the tissue, and so you basically suffocate, but there's not anything over your face. This is obviously going to interfere with performance. Psychomotor, behavioral, attention related activities, because think about it, your brain's not getting enough oxygen, you cannot focus appropriately, and carbon monoxide can lead to death. Particulate matter, think about this as like if you ever stood outside by a bonfire, the ash and stuff that comes up into the air from that's particulate matter. So pollen, really, really dusty areas, molds even. Soot is like stuff comes out of like a chimney. Aerosols, so think about if you've been spraying like spray sunscreen or something like that and you actually breathe it in. So particulate matter is just defined as solids found in the atmosphere. Now, typically through wood burning, through factories, mining, any kind of construction, you're going to get all different kinds of particulate from different fields like that. They tend to be small, So then you can inhale them. They can be absorbed into the bloodstream, or they can just stay in the lungs. They used to talk about how coal miners would get coal lungs, and it had to do with all that matter building up in their lungs. So being exposed to this can trigger asthma attacks, wheezing and coughing, obviously just general irritation. Anybody with COPD, emphysema, bronchitis, asthma, much, much greater problem, greater risk. So, if we're going to prevent dealing with air pollution as far as sports go, we have to stop or decrease activity during periods of high pollution. So, air quality reports. We get those around here. You might have seen one pop up on your phone from like a weather app. Not as big of a deal here as it would be in, say, a city like Detroit, Pittsburgh, New York, LA. Higher numbers of people, okay? So, in those areas, they tend to do activity is performed when commuter traffic is less and when the ambient temperature is lower, because that is a safer time respiratory wise. They avoid all the high times relative to the ozone levels. Also, running should be avoided in areas of high traffic because of all the auto emissions. That's why you tend to see people in New York City that go out of their way to go running in Central Park versus running down the side of the roadway like you might see people nowadays doing, or riding their bikes that way. Okay, so let's talk about the circadian dysrhythmia, which we said we commonly refer to as jet lag. So, this has to do with your biological clock getting out of sorts. Okay, typically the body maintains a 24-hour period. We call that our circadian rhythm. Our body adapts over time to changes, so it can be difficult to make very quick changes, even to something as simple as daylight savings time. So immediately, changes affect protein metabolism. Over 8 days, body temperature, and then over 3 weeks, the adrenal hormones. So jet lag actually refers to physical and mental effects caused by traveling rapidly across time zones. We see this most frequently in sleep-wake cycles, so when you're supposed to be awake versus when you're supposed to go to sleep. There can be some side effects. Usually the main thing that people struggle with is fatigue and headaches. This is where we see the majority of it, because you just don't feel good. You're kind of out of whack. Could cause digestive and GI problems, blood pressure issues, even heart rate and hormone releases, okay? Or even your bowel habits. All of that can be affected, okay? All of it. Now, the younger you are, the better that you are going to adapt and the more quickly that you will adjust. 30 to 50% faster adaptation if you're flying westward. So think about if you went from where we are right now to LA. If it is 10 a.m. here, it would be 8 a.m. there. So when you're going backwards in time, it's easier to adapt. North to south travel doesn't have any impact. So think about it. If you're just going from here straight north above us, it's really not going to be a big deal because we're all in the same time zone. Changes in the zones, illumination, and environment can be disruptive. Okay, so think about, we talked about areas of Alaska that are, think about illumination. Sometimes they may have sunlight for the majority of the day, if not the entire 24 hours. Okay, that's obviously going to affect it the same way as if it was night the whole time. This affects our athletes big time. It can negatively impact their performances. It can actually make you more likely to get injured, because when your circadian rhythm is thrown off, you're fatigued, you're not functioning at the same level. You're more likely to become dehydrated. It's just going to throw everything off, which means that you are essentially a liability to the team. You could become sick. We see people suffering from short-term anorexia because you're not hungry at the appropriate times. And so what people try to do is they'll be like, oh, I'll just wait. Like, it's when I should be eating, but I'll just not eat until it's the next time that you're supposed to eat here. People also do that with sleeping, thinking that that can help them push through and break that cycle. But yet again, we talked about headaches can actually affect your vision. dizziness, insomnia, or excessive tiredness. Either way, you're not going to get both. Typically, you're going to get one or the other. So, how to prevent this the best you can is make sure that whenever you are traveling and you're going to be crossing time zones, be well rested before you start. Don't have pulled an all-nighter for a college game and then be traveling and across time zones. Eat according to the time changes. So if you are leaving here at lunchtime, but when you get there, if when you land, it's lunchtime where you just came from, but it's not lunchtime there, wait until their lunchtime. Get back onto that schedule. Make sure you stay hydrated. Training schedules are very important for athletes when you're changing time zones. Need to stick to schedules. If you are traveling west, which is essentially backwards in time, use caffeine. Try to adopt local time as soon as you can. Alcohol is just going to worsen all of these effects. So, your population, I hope we're not dealing with that anyways, college populations, professional populations, avoiding alcohol is going to be a big part of it. Okay, overexposure to the sun. You need to think about this like extreme sunburn or issues on your skin. So this is not just an athlete problem. This is a coach's, athletic trainers, and any of the other staff that's out there working. I cannot tell you the number of coaches that I know that have experienced skin cancer of some form to some extent because of all of their long-term effects, long-term exposure to the sun. So some of the more simple things that it can cause: premature aging. Nobody wants that, but you're not going to die from it. However, skin cancer, you can, but it has to do with the ultraviolet exposure. We tend to see premature aging, dryness, cracking, and the skin's just not near as elastic. It doesn't bounce back. It kind of gets saggy. Now, skin cancer, most common malignant tumor found in humans, period. So it could be damage to DNA is suspected as the cause of cancer. Here are the three most common types: basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and malignant melanoma. So, but positive wise is that rate of cure is 95% if it's caught early. People that are fair skinned, like me, are way more susceptible. So, my blonde hair, blue eyed, pale skinned people, if sunscreen's not our friend, we're going to be looking old really early and we're going to be running high risks of cancer. It's just how it is. So, sunscreen can help, okay? It has effectiveness. That's the SPF. And I don't know if any of you know, but that actually stands for sun protection factor. And that basically tells you how many times longer an individual can be exposed to the sun with versus without sunscreen before the skin is going to turn red. So the higher the SPF, the longer that you could go versus somebody that doesn't have it. Okay? So if you have a higher chance, a higher issue, then you want a higher SPF. I use extremely high SPF. People make fun of me all the time. But I took a medication when I was younger that actually damaged the way that my cells can process UV radiation. So I am more likely to burn and have all kinds of skin problems. So I use extremely high SPF. Like I'm talking, I probably never drop below a 50 SPF ever all summer long, period. But that's because I know what I have to deal with. Plus, I'm already on the lighter end of the spectrum as far as eyes, hair color, and skin color. Now, I used to keep this in my kit when I was an athletic trainer all the time. It was for coaches, it was for athletes, it was for myself, it was for whoever was out there. Okay. You need to be using it. It does not matter if you have a light complexion or a dark complexion, your skin is still getting the UV radiation. A lot of people view SPF as being something to keep you from tanning. That's not it. It doesn't matter how dark brown your skin is. You are still going to get UV radiation. You can still get skin cancer. Sunscreen could still help you. Okay? So, skin color doesn't have anything to do with this. Now, 60 to 80% of all exposure tends to occur before you turn 20. Unless you have a job like a coach or an athletic trainer, and then you spend all of your time outside. Now, here's the big key. 15 to 30 minutes before you're going to be out is when you're supposed to apply sunscreen. It should also be reapplied frequently, especially if you are swimming or sweating a ton, or if you've got like a towel and you've been wiping off like all your sweat, been wiping stuff off, then you need to apply more frequently. And last but not least, let's talk about turf. Not the pretty grass that everybody has, but the fake stuff, the synthetic turf. Places love it, schools love it, athletes tend to love it, coaches tend to love it. It's durable, it's consistent, so you don't have to worry about like bumps, holes, rocks. The bad weather doesn't get muddy. Don't need to mow it. All of those kinds of things are great. A lot of people think that they're faster on it. It doesn't break down when you're running around on it. There have been tons of advances as far as turf goes. Started in the 1960s. Infill turf is what we use most now, and we call it infill because it's got those little black turf beads that are inside of it. So it's very similar to grass. It is actually made of polyethylene and polypropylene yarn. It's on a base of sand, rubber pellets, or some combination. Most of the really good turf fields that I've been on are that combination. Now, here's the big thing with turf. There's a huge debate, and most athletic trainers tend to fall on the side of more injuries, but people argue over whether or not injuries are more likely to happen on turf or not. They say that it's not conclusive evidence that turf increases injury rates, but for the most part, every athletic trainer that I've ever worked with agrees that they are more likely on turf. A lot of coaches and athletes say that too, that they would rather play on natural surfaces, but they see the advantages of the whole no divots, no, the ground holding up, it's all flat, all of that. Probably your best combo is when we see hybrids, which is the more durable grasses. But there's just this big debate. I'm a firm believer that there are more lower body injuries because of turf than not, because of the way that the cleats in your feet stick in the turf and the turf doesn't give way the way natural grass would. Now, synthetic surfaces, they do they lose shock absorbing capabilities. Injuries are more likely to occur if you're training always on the turf, like you're never going anywhere else. Um, Things travel at higher speeds on turf, so you can have more injuries due to collisions. Think about whether you're playing soccer, baseball, softball, the balls are going to travel harder and faster. People can typically, there's going to be increased force and impact. Shoes don't stick, will significantly reduce the like of injury. So if you had true turf shoes, those are going to be, well, turf shoes are made to kind of grip. Honestly, if you were in tennis shoes, you're going to be less likely to have injury. If you're in real cleats and even turf shoes, they're made to grip it. So that's when you're going to see shoes sticking and people hurting ankles and knees and all kinds of problems. Not to mention, one of the top things that we deal with are abrasions, aka turf burns on elbows and knees and probably hips. Most common places that we see them. Um, they're a pain to cover. They bust back open all the time. They're very similar to floor burns in volleyball or basketball. They're just annoying. We also see a lot of turf toe injuries, which is those don't happen as much if your shoes have really firm bottom, but turf toe is an over extension of the big toe. So basically if the big toe gets bent towards your face further than it should, which tends to happen in turf. So we see a lot of turf toe. And that's it. That is the end of our presentation. We have now officially covered all of our environmental aspects.